here and talking about the topics. So some words just about the conference. The idea of this conference was to study the architectural typologies of monotheistic religions, not as an isolated, autonomous phenomenon, but to do it by comparison and to analyze if between churches, mosques and synagogues there are a permeability, there are interactions, there are relationships, also strong relationships, and often also similar or the same models the architects had to tie. So we wanted to widen the horizon of such analysis by this method. This can help to note that the typologies are not so far away. They are very far away, I agree. But there's also a key and a method to interpret them by such topics of relationships and change. And another point, very interesting for us, was also the migration, the relation between Orient and Occident, and the way in which some ideas, some techniques, and some forms and patterns can be assimilated in another context, and to pay attention also to the relationship between aesthetic and functional values. It is clear that in all the choices done by patrons in the Western and the Eastern world, liturgical functions had a very important role to play. So it is not the first conference of this program. The first conference took place in Istanbul in 2017. It was a collaboration between the Swedish Institute, Research Institute, and École Pratique des Hautes Études, and also the Max Planck Institute für Kunstgeschichte in Florence. Then we had another one at the Columbia University of New York. Then came the COVID, and we had to wait to go on. And in 22, a third conference took place at the Museum of the Synagogue in Rome. And so I think an international group, network of researchers came out of these seminars, and I am very, very happy that we can meet here. Cairo is for us an ideal place to widen and to enlarge our experience. And so I am happy that we will here discuss about the topic, that we will do also a visit in Cairo. And another good news, there's a first book with more significant articles of the conferences that took already place. It will be published very soon in springtime of the next year, and I think this will be a first step to deepen this highly important theme and to develop, perhaps together with the IFAO, also other publication projects and other debates in future. Thank you very much, and I hope we will have a very, very interesting debate.
Thank you, Dr. Sabine. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you all and to welcome our wonderful speakers who came especially for this conference, and our wonderful audience as well. And we will start now with our first session and our first speaker. We will have just a slight change. We will start by the presentation of Dr. Radwa Zaki. Dr. Radwa Zaki from the Library of Alexandria, head researcher from the Library of Alexandria, Biblioteca Alexandrina. I'm very happy to welcome her here. She will talk about crosses in mosques and Islamic symbols in churches, the mutual artistic influences between Islamic and Christian architecture in the medieval Mediterranean. Please welcome Dr. Radwa.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and delighted to participate in this interesting conference. But first of all, I would like to thank my friend and colleague Fatma Keshk and, of course, Dr. Sabina for letting me be part of this conference. So, as Fatma said, today I will going to discuss the mutual artistic influence between Islamic and Christian architecture in medieval. Are you hearing me well? Okay, thank you. In medieval Mediterranean, and we'll try to explore together how symbols like crosses in mosques and Islamic decorative elements in churches reflect a shared artistic heritage. So first of all, the medieval Mediterranean was a crossroad where diverse cultures and artistic exchange interacted. Because of the trade routes and the close geographical proximity in regions like Sicily in southern Italy and in Granada in southern Spain, this allowed Islamic and Christian artistic elements to blend. And for example, I have here two examples came from Victoria and Albert Museum in London. We can see ivory casket and also silk textile have an Arabic inscriptions. So the medieval Mediterranean changing political control led to a mix Christian and Islamic and even Byzantine influences. And this blend is very clear, as we will going to see, in architecture, where churches and mosques shared artistic elements. So the first example I'm going to show you is the Arabic inscription in the Islamic, in the Cappella Platina Chapel in Palermo in Sicily. So the Cappella Platina is the royal chapel which was built by the Norman rulers in Sicily in the 11th and 12th century, and it's located within the Norman palace in Palermo. The chapel symbolized a true cultural diversity as it witnessed a remarkable blend of Byzantine and Islamic arts. And for this reason, it was inscribed on the UNESCO World List. So we can see here the ceiling show a true and pure Islamic influences despite being a part of Christian chapel. It features a star polygon decorated with lively scenes of Islamic representation and cornices. Here I think we can see it more. We can see not only a lively scene of Islamic representation, but also muqarnases, which is a stalactite vaulting, and this is a prominent feature of Islamic decorative elements. And we can see Arabic inscription combined together with Christian motifs. And this is only surviving monumental architecture with this clear Islamic influence from the Fatimid or medieval period in the Mediterranean. So let's have a closer look to this part, or the wooden ceiling of star-shaped panel. We have Arabic inscription of prayers and good wishes, and it's written in Kufic script around the polygons. And we can read in a clear Arabic state, which is like النصر والأقبال واليمن والعز. This is in Arabic. In English, victory, prosperity, faith, blessing and glory, and safety and preservation and protection. So we can see that the painting here depicting Islamic style human figures like dancers and musicians. Here is one is very clear, and above it we can see a figure of saint, of a Christian saint, and this all surrounded by geometrical and floral decoration. Some researchers believe that this ceiling was decorated either by Fatimid artists or that they were inspired by Fatimid designs came from Egypt, as requested of King Rogero II, who built this chapel. So these studies rely on the close political and cultural ties between Cairo and between Italy. And this connection, sorry, just one moment. The connection between Rogero II and the Cairo Caliph is supported by their personal letters and exchange of gifts, and also visits of Egyptian diplomats to Palermo. It is very interesting to find similar designs can be seen in Fatimid stucco and wooden sculptures. Some are found in the Mamluk Bimaristan of Qalawun in the middle of El Mu'izz Street, but it's now an Islamic Cairo museum. And we can see how similar of the scenes here and in Capella Platina. And regardless of the context, we can say that the church ceiling showcased the ultimate artistic expressions reflecting the Islamic heritage in the Mediterranean. Now let's talk about other features of artistic exchange, which is Arabic inscription in European art and architecture. Mainly, I would like to talk about the pseudo-Kufic inscription. A lot of luxury silk textile, just like this example here in front of us, produced in Islamic lands, offer feature designs like Arabic scripts and geometric patterns that became very fashionable in Christian Europe. Most of the inscriptions were meaningless. We're going to have some examples consisting of letters of Kufic script, and this is one of the earliest Arabic scripts that, when created outside the Arabic context, are referred as pseudo-Arabic or pseudo-inscriptions. So the first example for us today, we will go into Greece, where in Phokias, Osius Locus Monastery. We can see here the pseudo inscriptions, which became increasingly common in medieval European churches from 10th to 13th century, mainly as a decorative elements on exterior walls. For this example, this significant existing example in medieval Byzantine architecture is dating back to 10th century. Here we can see on the exterior wall of the Eastern Church, mainly because there are two churches on the ministry, featured red bricks and white marble are stripped in patterns. And this is influence of Islamic type of building, and it's called in Arabic al-Mushahhar. And we can see a lot of examples here in Cairo dates back to the Mamluk period. Here is a closer look for this kind of pseudo inscriptions, and we can see that it does not create real words, and it's often hard to read and tends to be illegible. And its purpose only for decoration, as far as we know. It's designed here as a repeated interlaced forms of letters like Alif, A, and Lam, L, with decorative floral ends. We are still in Greece, but we go from Phokias to Athens, where we can find the second example is the church of Cappadocia, which built in the 11th century AD. It's one of the oldest Byzantine church in Athens and built over the ruins of ancient Greek temple. Just like our monastery, the first example, the exterior of the church also features pseudo-Arabic patterns on the facade. And we can see the traces of this script very clear. Here is a closer look. We can read that these inscriptions reads Al-Mulk Lillah in Arabic. In English, it's power belongs to God. And if you notice, this is very similar to the slogan in Alhambra Palace, La ghaliba illa Allah, no victory but Allah. So, what are the reasons for incorporating such Islamic decorative elements? We have mainly two motivations. Of course, the first is the artistic imitation. Mainly for the pseudo-Kufic or the illegible inscriptions, this was an influence of Islamic culture for the Byzantine art, and this is highlighting an artistic exchange between Muslims and Christians. For the second case scenario, when we are able to read the inscription, which form a significant phrase related to Islamic presence, as for the first example, this is mainly for ideological reasons. It affirms the visual identity of Islamic culture in regions influenced by Muslim medieval, like, as I said before, Sicily, and also we can see this a lot in Granada, southern of Spain. So now let's go to our beloved Cairo, to Al-Azhar. While less common, we can find Christian symbols can be found in some Islamic buildings. This is a totally opposite, particularly in ancient Islamic capital, just like Fatimid Cairo. We have cross motifs appears on reused columns reallocated from Christian and Roman buildings to the mosque. For example, in Al-Azhar Mosque, we have a lot of examples. Al-Azhar Mosque is the first Fatimid mosque to be built in Cairo, and it dates back to the 10th century. And it's one of the most significant religious and educational institutions, not only in Egypt, but also in the Islamic world. When constructed, as we can see the plan on the left side, the mosque featured open central courtyard, or in Arabic, الصحن, and it's surrounded with 4 arcades or ruwaqs. The largest one is ruwaq al-Qibla. The mosque is remarkable for its diverse architectural elements and particularly its vast collection of ancient marble columns. And these columns show variety of artistic styles, with many are influenced by Roman styles featuring Corinthian and composite capitals. We can see here some of them. Let's go deep in the sahn of the mosque, where a lot of capitals are engraved in crosses. Most of them either are partially erased or other who has lost their upper rib. As far as I know, we don't have any kind of a full or complete cross in a mosque even after the Fatimid period. So we have different examples here. Also, some used capitals in Al-Azhar feature engraving of birds, such as pigeons or eagles. And it's worth mentioning that we have a historical narrative about these columns, which mainly have this depiction of birds, and it was said by some medieval historians like Ibn Abd al-Zahir, al-Maqrizi, and al-Maqdisi, and all of them are repeating the same narration, which is the bird decoration on this capital were believed to be served as a magical talisman in order to prevent birds from nesting in the mosque, and they are stating with an Arabic state said, فلا يسكنه عصفور ولا يفرخ به وكذا سائر الطيور من الحمام واليمام وغيره. وهي صورة 3 طيور منقوشة كل صورة على رأس عمود. And actually they are not 3, they are more than that. So of course, if anyone visited Al-Azhar before, we're going to know that this belief is totally untrue, as birds are everywhere. We have here another example also from Al-Azhar, where we can find this here style of bird. Here is another one. Here is, I think this is not clear enough, but we can say that Al-Azhar stands as a model of mutual influence between Coptic and Islamic architectural heritage in medieval Egypt. So the last example we have today is also Fatimid Mosque, which is the last Fatimid mosque to be built in Cairo. It's El Salih Tala'a Mosque, which is located near Bab Zuela, and it was built by the Fatimid Vizier El Salih Tala'a Ibn Razyak. This mosque features a traditional open courtyard design, just like Al-Azhar, but it's more smaller, and it's surrounded by 4 arcades. The mosque interior is supported by 34 ancient marble columns. All the columns in the mosque are reused columns. Here we have in the Qibla arcade some columns that bear crosses, just like the examples before, engraved in the upper parts of their capital. Some are incomplete also, while others have a missing grip, usually at the upper parts. Also, very interesting example we can find here to the left. We can find also a cross without the upper rib, and we can see on the right side, a unique column that has a capital engraved with a bird spreading its wing. Also, its head is broken. By the way, we can find that all the birds engraved in the columns are having a missing or broken head. Here are the last example. This is a very unique column also in Salih Tala'a Mosque, where we can see an Byzantine eagle, and it's missing also its head, as I said before. So what drove this artistic exchange for the Muslim architecture? Is it functional needs, practical factors, or decorative purposes? Actually, we should backwards to the early Islamic periods, when Muslim communities settled in ancient countries such as Egypt, Syria, and Tunisia, which had many old monuments. They faced the practical need for construction material and reused elements for these older buildings when building their new mosque. Ancient marble columns were practically valuable for them because they were available and helped meet construction needs very quickly and cost effectively. So the reuse of the materials includes those with Christian motifs, and it was done totally pragmatically. I would like to say it again. It was totally pragmatically without any kind of religious concern. Islamic builders prioritized worth and functionality, treating old monuments as valuable resources for their architectural needs. So we can say it's clear that economical and practical factors are the key. At the new Islamic capitals, as I said before, were formed architects faced challenges in sources columns for mosque courtyards, often needing large quantities of columns. So this shortage of suitable materials led to the reuse of a lot of columns from existing ancient structures. This practice allowed Islamic architects to reduce construction costs and speed up the building process. So we can say this is a kind of economic reuse of ancient monuments, trying to maximize available resources while maximizing expenses and time. So finally, not to take too much time, if we are trying to put what is common in front of what is different between Christian architecture and Islamic architecture, we can find, or I would like to begin with similarities. Both of them had the religious identity that did not strictly limit architectural creativity. And also we have a common factor, which is the Asiatic motivation, which played a significant role for this exchange, both for Muslims and Christian patrons. And finally, I'd like to say that there is a lot of complex reasons or even hidden reasons. We cannot know each time the reason for reusing such an element or influence came from another religion in a religious structure. So we should first pay attention and understand the specific cultural and historical context when studying such an influence. So what is the difference? Let's begin with Christian architecture. As I said before, Asiatic appreciations came first. Christian patrons were greatly admired with epigraphic and geometric ornamental richness of Islamic art, and also they want to enhance their cultural and political status when using this kind of Islamic artistic elements. The opposite, or totally opposite, for the case of Islamic architecture. The functional and the pragmatical reasons, as I said before, came first. Islamic art was influenced not only by religious principles, but also for local tradition, the diversity of building materials, and various cultural influences. They pay attention only for the adaptability and flexibility, and they are able to incorporate and build upon existing material and resources they found everywhere. So that's all for me, and thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too long or boring. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Radwa. We have time for one or two questions, if you have questions. Yeah, I saw a hand, no? Yes, please.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Thank you very much for this really inspiring paper, really presenting many different materials that elicit our curiosity and provoke thoughts. And I'm grateful that you in your summary focused on the aspect of aesthetic pleasure. And my question is, do you see a difference in the way that Muslim builders, for example in Cairo, brought aesthetic qualities of the spolia that they were using to an effect, and the way Christian architects, for example of Byzantine churches, used Islamic motifs in their buildings? Is that the same kind of aesthetic
I'm
interest?
sorry, but what do you mean with aesthetic?
Well, artistic. I mean, aesthetic. I mean, the pleasure of the look of the motifs. I think you alluded to it.
You mean the motivations behind the exchange?
Yes, I mean, you underlined that it was less driven by ideology and more by interest in the design. And my question is, was it similar on both sides, or were there differences in this attitude? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Actually, this topic I have been searching for years because my PhD is about reusing ancient architectural elements in Cairo. But recently I tried to have the opposite approach, try to know is there Christian or Byzantine art like to have Islamic influence, because this is totally different. They did not reuse Islamic building. They focused or they designed their architecture to have Islamic influence, while Muslims came and they are thinking why we didn't take something from this neglected or old architecture everywhere. And this is not only in Egypt. We can find this in all the, as I said before, in the ancient cities, which has a lot of monuments. They see that this is wealth. We need to make use of it. So they have these marble columns. They were aware about the worth of marble columns, whether they have cross, whether they have eagle, whether they have anything. It's all about worth. It's all about pragmatical reasons. They did not have marble, and they did not search for marble, and they did not bring it from its sources like Italy and Greece. Though they have a lot of wealth. For this reason, okay, we use what already in our hands. As far as I know, we didn't find a kind of Christian influence in Islamic architecture. Maybe there are cases, I don't know, but we didn't find, I talk about architecture because for artifacts or for Islamic art is totally different, because by the time of the Ayyub period, the time of Saladin or something like that, we have some artifacts that have Arabic inscription and the figures of saints, and it's not made in Europe, it's made in the Islamic lands. But this was for economic reason, because the artisans want a lot of people to buy his own piece. So it's totally different. While the architecture, it was the decision of a ruler or Amir, for example, a one who have power and state. So he should think what he wants to, or what message he wants to deliver if he incorporate something like reused column. After studying this topic for years, sometimes I feel that we are overloading reasons. Maybe they are not thinking a lot about this. They are just have some beautiful, valuable columns, and they want to build a mosque, and they want a lot of columns, especially in the Fatimid period, because the Mamluk architecture became totally different for design. They did not need a lot of columns. So they have wealth and they use it. Thank you. I hope I understand your question well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your extremely interesting presentation. I wonder, I mean, from a standing point of the stonemasons and workshops in charge of the making of this stone decoration, specifically the capitals. So how much these large availabilities of ancient Roman capitals was considered, could have been a hurdle in developing the skills of this and the creativity of the stonemasons? I mean, in other words, what do we know about the crafters, the stonemason of this decoration?
Well, thank you for your very interesting question. The idea or the phenomena of reusing a lot of ancient building materials affect in a very bad way for the Muslim builders and architects, as they did not develop any kind of Islamic capital until the 4th century. So they took too much time in order to try to have their own design. And their design, to be very honest, very poor, cannot compare totally with either Roman, Corinthian, composite capitals, because the Romans are the people of sculpture. The Arabs are not. Or maybe we can say that for the 1st or even to the 6th century, Starting from the end of the Ayyub period, we're going to find the Muqarnas capital. And after that, it was developed further during the Mamluk period. You can find elegant and great examples in Sultan Hassan complex and a lot of other Mamluk structures. But before that time, before the Ayyub period, I'm sorry to say they did not develop the Islamic capitals, just like a bulb or onion, very simple and very poor decoration. Thank you.
Okay, one last question.
Brief commentary. You show us the capitals in the San of Al-Azhar.
Al-Azhar, yes.
Yeah. You said that there were a lot of birds, but I think I saw a cherub.
Sorry?
A cherub, which is an angel with 4 wings, which is a symbol of the Temple of Solomon, which appears not only in the Bible, but also in the Quran. So maybe...
This is great and new information for me, actually.
No, one of the capitals, I'm sure, contains a cherub.
Okay.
And they are all reused. All the capitals are reused in Al-Azhar.
You know, when I have read the Arabic inscription, the medieval historians just mentioned 3 examples of birds. I think that they saw only 3 examples, but they are a lot. Actually, when I visit Al-Azhar or an ancient mosque, every time I found something new for me. So this is very, very interesting, and maybe it needs further studies, I think. And today, I will be very happy to accompany you with in the Citadel, and we're going to explain a similar artistic exchange where we're going to find some columns with crosses in the Mamluk Mosque of Nasr Muhammad ibn Qalawun at the Citadel. So who knows, maybe you'll discover a new one.
Thank you very much, Radwa. Now we move to our next presentation by Dr. Sabine Chamel, and it will be about ideal centrality, the Ottoman Mosque and the Chiquento Church. Please welcome Dr. Sabine.
So thank you so much, Radwa, for this exciting lecture. The mine had to be the first, but for a mysterious problem, the PowerPoint preferred not to be on the screen, and so we had to resolve this little problem. I will not speak from Egypt, but in a wider way of the influence between East and West. And I used French captions. I don't know, perhaps some colleagues want to have also a bridge between English and my French and my English presentation. Contamination and cross-pollution between Western Renaissance and Orient was intensive and ties to a long tradition. At the end of the 15th century, the Sultan had contact with Sigismondo Malatesta in Rimini, who charged Leon Battista Alberti with his mausoleum, and with Filarete in Milan, who worked for the Sforza. The Venetian Gentile Bellini was in the service of Sultan Mehmed II in Constantinople, where he stayed for a year and turned to Venice about 1480 in elegant clothes and with gifts. He brought drawings which served for the figures with wheels and turbans, and in 1503 Leonardo da Vinci sent a drawing to Bayezid II for the Bridge of the Golden Horn, of 214 meters. And also Michelangelo came in touch with the court of Constantinople, Istanbul. That the change between Western and Eastern models was intensive show the project of the new cathedral in Pavia. The patrons wanted a building accordingly to the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, documented by a drawing of the Codice Barbarignano by Giuliano da Sangallo. It doesn't refer to the Cathedral of Pavia, but this shows that artists were interested in this building, and this building had been documented. In Western Renaissance, and first of all in Italy, where the principles of harmony, equilibrium, and musical proportions played an important role, the unified sacred room became an ideal. Since the Quattrocento, architects tried in theory and in praxis to reach it, and I show here the drawing of Bramante of 1505 for St. Peter's, from prototypes from the Greek and Roman antiquity. But the heterogeneous functions of a Christian church embracing, apart from a meeting room of the believer, an altar, the choir, sacristies, presbyteries, relics, chapels, funerary chapels, baptisteries, treasuries, up to bell towers, made it very, very difficult to reach the ideal of the unified space. With the increasing number of saints, relicts, altars, masses, and chapels of common service, they split more and more in individual masses of the prayers. Particularly private chapels changed the shape of the Christian church. Reformation will try to reduce it. Such religious architecture mirrored the hierarchical, mystical, and individualist mentality of the Western society. The centralized sacral building not easily fit with the functions of the cathedrals, monasteries, churches, or parish churches, and for this reason, typologies like sanctuaries, oratories, or mausoleums, marked by less complex functions, are compatible with this ideal. So we have some testimonies of centralized building, but only for such typologies and not for the big churches or these cathedrals. After having settled in Rome and having studied Roman antiquity, Bramante proposed in 1505 to Julius II a project for the reconstruction of St. Peter, and you see still the plan on the screen. He was one of the first to rediscover the cross-dome system of Byzantine origin with a central cupola, and one can see it better here in the reconstruction of the plan, and his idea to the hierarchically ascending structure. So a main cupola was to distinguish here the high altar and the teatro sacro of the Semiramis, and peripheral cupolas in the corner. Typology which came from Orient, I will talk about this a little bit later, and had been assimilated here in this case. The Western Cross arm was the house of the chapter and Julius' funerary chapel, and the three other arms, each accessible through an own vestibule, would have houses thousands of pilgrims. But already, as you see also the medal of the project accordingly to Bramante, and here again the Medaille de Carados, so the 1505. But already in 1506, Bramante had to sacrifice the central plan in order to add a nave suitable for accommodating the many worshippers and controlling their movements. In 1546, Michelangelo proposed again a centralized building, so the ideal of the Renaissance architect, but it had been compromised again by the nave, which you can see when you visit today St. Peter's. So it reveals, and St. Peter is not the only case of such behavior, that at the end, the centralized building remains a dream, and a big nave had to be added to respond to the functions of this building. So let's have a look how things developed in the Eastern world. Here, the main model is, I remember just the prototypes of the Western world of the Renaissance, the Pantheon and other buildings coming from Roman antiquity. But in the Eastern world, things are very, very different. The main model is from the 6th century, from the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, and enlarged by Constantine I, the Hagia Sophia. It became a mosque after the Turkish conquest. The Hagia Sophia is not really a centralized building, but dominated by a longitudinal axe culminating in the apse, which guides the steps of the believers, and this path of the believer in direction of the apsis is the path recording at the culminating point of this Iter the presence of the emperor. So the path is emphasized by the central dome, to which are adjoined half domes and evoke, together with the apse, the presence of the emperor. The foundation of the mosque, and I will show, everybody knows the Hagia Sophia. I think it's not necessary to show too much images, to remember this longitudinal axe which coincides with the idea of the centralized building, and this, I think, shows very good this path toward the apsis with the symbol of the emperor. The foundation of the mosque of Bayezid II by Heradin is approximately of the same time of Bramante's project for St. Peter's. We can immediately note that the inner functions of such a building are more or less complex. A huge meeting room, rather a multifunctional hall, where are neither sacraments or priests, and an assembly. And in this way, by this assembly, it is a more democratic space. The equipment concerns only the niche, mipra. I don't know, it is necessary that I show this. And set into the hall in direction of the city of Mecca, Qibla, and the pulpit, minbar, of the prayer provided by some steps. The center is crowned by the main cupola, but not as a distinction at the area of a main altar, like we saw it in St. Peter's, but as spiritual elevation of the prayer room provided by mysterious sources of light, and seen from the silhouette of the town, a strong symbol both of the Sultan and the state religion. It is obvious, so to remember that the two projects are from the same time, the Bayazet Mosque and the first project from Bamante from St. Peter's. And here we see the interior of the mosque. It is obvious that Bayazet and his architect tie to the model of the Hagia Sophia. But there are some significant changes. So we see in both the buildings the longitudinal axe. The longitudinal axe, which is articulated in a rather similar way. But there are some differences, that's clear, there are many differences. The pillars supporting the main dome are not more hidden, like in the Hagia Sophia, in the masonry, but constitute autonomous elements that make the static interplay of forces clearly visible. So it's a more rational way to articulate the architectural structure. For functional reasons, the apsis of the Hagia Sophia is here substituted by the Mimra, while its place at the end of the longitudinal axe recalls, I think, always the place of the emperor, occupied here ideally by the Sultan. The peripheral spaces are organized also in a more rational way, a succession of 5 square bays on each side, and their relationship is much less mysterious than in the Hagia Sophia. So it is possible that there is some Western influence in this way to organize the patterns and the distribution and the relationship between structure and form. Sinon became for a long time the chief architect of Soliman the Magnificent and was highly interested in the renewal of sacred architecture. The Shiitza Mehmet Mosque that Solomon commissioned as a memorial for his favorite and eldest son, who died in 1543, reveals clearly his interest in a centralized space. So we have here the exterior volume, which makes clear the very, very strong organization, and it is one of Sinan's more important and also earliest works. The plan differs from the Bayazet Mosque because the longitudinal axe, so you see again the Mosque for Bayazet and here the Seyyid Mehmet Mosque, that the longitudinal axe that characterized the Bayazet Mosque is here abundant in favor of a 4-leaf clave system in which the main dome is the center of the hall and symmetrically framed by, it is developing on all the volume, and we have a base also only in the corners. The ground floor is dominated by 4 pillars linked to the counter pillars in the exterior wall, which creates a very coherent structure. Intensive light penetrates in the inner room and the fenestrate walls. However, only the lightening of the Mirabe is direct, and it is filtered on the 3 other walls by deep arcades and loggias. The exterior volume, and now we are again inside, we can see very well here this geometrical symmetrical structure of the main dome and the half dome, the abandon of the longitudinal axis. And here it is also obvious at the exterior silhouette that the structure of the inner room is now translated to the exterior silhouette. So we have really a correspondence that is a very, very important principle of the architecture of the Renaissance that you can recognize the inner structure when you see the volume from the outside. Here again, one can wonder whether, but we have no details, no document talked about this. If Sinan had not, it would be exaggerated to be influenced, but if he had some knowledge of the building site of St. Peter's, it was a very, very long building site, and I think drawings circulated. It was not so difficult to have some idea what happened there. Anyhow, when we see the plan of Said Mehmet and the plan of the big architectural model of Antonio da Sangallo Giovanni of 1538, we can note some similarities and also some architectural principles of perfectly symmetrical organism, which should to have been important also to Sinan in this period. And again, the project from Michelangelo of 46, I think, reveals something very, very similar. But again, we don't know in which way it took place the migration of such concepts. It would be totally wrong to think that the Said Mehmet Mosque was adopted immediately as model as for a centralized sacred building in the Ottoman work. Only some years later, in 57, when Suleiman commissioned Sinan to build his own mosque, he goes back to the model of the Hagia Sophia. Here can we see this in a very, very clear view. You have again the longitudinal X composed by a main cupola and two half cupolas. Like the Mosque of Bayazet, the building is provided by the longitudinal X, emphasized by the cupolas, and even if Solomon did adopt the symmetrical pattern for the plan, and the structure of the building benefits clearly from the experience of the Said Mehmet Mosque. It is all stronger, the pillars are stronger, the architectural organization is more concentrated and more characterized by geometrical clearness. But it is clear that Suleiman wanted to keep the model of Santa Sofia. It is still linked to the imagine of the imperial power that Suleiman wanted to conserve and to revive. It's a hypothesis. We talked about this already. Is this the will of a patron? Or did the architect change? Was it not entirely convinced by the experience of the symmetrical system of the preceding buildings he realized? It could be linked also to the typology of the building. It is not the Caesar Mosque, is a Prince Mosque, was a memorial building. Suleiman's Mosque was the mosque of the emperor, of the sultan. And this choice could also be connected to functions like specific ceremonial and right reserved to the figure of the sultan. So again, we can approach this also to Western experience, but here we can see clearly that Suleiman ties to the model of the Mosque of Bayazet and so to the Hagia Sophia. And some photos of the inside, which marks again the longitudinal axis, and it seems the way to evoke and to fix the place of the emperor inside of the religious building. The symmetrical system only came fully established in the Blue Mosque of the Sultan Ahmed I, built in 1609 to 17. by Sedef Khan Mehmet Aga, who made full use, very full use of the specific patterns of the Seyyid Mehmet Mosque, the four-leaf clover system, and this photo shows it very well, the geometric clearness of this construction. Then no longitudinal direction, the four-leaf clover system inscribed in the quadrangular volume, crowned by the main cupola, half domes, square base provided by little cupolas in the corners, only in the corners, a wide opened structure, and here we can see this comparison that is really inscribed in the continuity of Sinan's shared mosque, but very, very later. And we see the result in the inner rooms. All is homogeneous, all the structure is coherent, also the mihrab is integrated in the center of the qibla, flanked by wall projections on one of which serves as background of the minbar, a perfect coherence between form and function. And the same is true for the organization of the inner rooms. Again, a comparison between these two constructions. And also, we saw already the exterior volume corresponded, strengthened by the minarets, reveals the harmonious proportions of the interior of the building, a response of the ideal of architectural harmony in the sense of Leon Battista Alberti. All the main elements, down to the smallest detail, answer to the overriding law, and nothing can be added or taken away without shaking it. So it seems that the Blue Mosque is the ideal created a new image for imperial power that substituted the model of Santa Sofia. At the same time, the architecture keeps traditional elements, stalactites, and the subdivision of the pillars in two parts and different decorations divided by a frieze. Architectural innovation in the Ottoman architecture is less linear than in the Western world and consists in combinations between traditional patterns and new idioms. Such an interplay between tradition and innovation is favored by the fact that Ottoman architecture didn't show any interest in Vitruvian orders, an indicator of the capacity for new renewal of the Renaissance architecture in Italy. As we saw, the reciprocal influences between Italian and Renaissance and Ottoman are not so easy to specify in a precise way. For the Sultan and its architects, St. Peter in Rome was undoubtedly the more important building site and could have influenced some of the design decisions. On the other hand, Santa Sofia never benefits of a reception in the Italian Renaissance. What is astonishing, because it combines the centralized plan with the longitudinal axe, the main topic of the Italian architects from Brunelleschi to Michelangelo. To finish, I would like to show how things work. Things didn't work in a linear or rational way, no. But there is a type of migration, and I would dedicate the last minutes of my paper to this phenomenon of the cross dome structure. I mentioned it already at the beginning of my paper concerning St. Peter. To better understand the influence of Byzantine architecture in Italy, mainly the cross dome type and its reception, we have to have a look to Venice. Narrowly linked to the Orient by political and commercial activity. In 1063 had been begun St. Mark Basilica by two architects from Constantinople, according to the model to the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. I don't know, this is an Idean image of the Church of the Holy Apostles. Perhaps there are new research which can define this in a more precise way, which had been rebuilt by Justinian and commissioned to the architects of the Hagia Sophia, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidor Millet, and it had been demolished in 1463. It was the second most important church of Constantinople and had now a very important influence in Venice, like we can see here. From Venice, this influence went to Padua. Padua is nearby, and there we have the church, the Basilica of Sant'Antonio, and also other churches adopting this type of the cross-dome church with cupolas also in the nave. And then it reached Milan. We have this type in the work of Filarete. Then we have it in the work of Leonardo. Leonardo worked in Milan together with Bramante from 1480 to 99. And in the manuscript B of Leonardo da Vinci, we have an important number of such assimilations of the type of the cross-dome structure coming from the Orient. And we have also some drawings from Leonardo which are very, very similar to the project of Bramante of St. Peter's of 1505. Here, so you can see it. So I think it is not astonishing that the project of Bramante for the reconstruction of St. Peter adopts the same system. The main cupola, accompanied by little cupolas crowning the peripheral spaces. There are certainly a lot of differences, and we showed to show these differences in a little digitalized reconstruction of this project. The main cupola is more dominating, the peripheral strongly subordinated, the coffered walls and the cupola are more structural and heavier cross arms protruding from the building. But in 1514, when the Pope studied again proposals for the never-ending building site of St. Peter, he asked Fra Giocondo from Verona to come to Rome. And his project, provided by a longitudinal X, reveals clearly the influence of cross-dome structure as it had been adopted in Padua, and he lived nearby Padua. This idea of Fra Giocondo was perhaps to revive the image of the Apostle Church. So, influence from Oriental architecture on St. Peter arrived via diversion from Venice and Milan. At the same time, the evolution of Sinan's architectural language towards more rational, symmetrical systems could tie to Michelangelo or Antonio da Sangallo's works for St. Peter. Anyhow, the liturgical functions of the mosque fostered the unified sacral room that could only remain a dream in the Western world for great houses of God. But the comparison revealed also that the evolution of churches and mosques belong to a wide network of Eastern traditions and that influences coming from foreign traditions and cultures played a very strong role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine. We start the discussion, and we can have questions for Dr. Sabine and for Dr. Radwa as well.
A question for Dr. Sabine. Sorry. A question for Dr. Sabine. Don't exhibit a linear. Sorry, a question for you. You said the Ottomans don't exhibit a linear progression in their history, architecture. Is there any continuity between Ottoman architecture and, say, Seljuk architecture? or Arabic Islamic architecture? Is there any continuity between Ottoman architecture and Seljuk architecture, Turkish architecture before the Ottomans?
Est-ce qu'il y a une continuité entre l'architecture ottomane et l'architecture ottomane turque avant les Ottomans?
So when I said the evolution in Western architecture is more linear, it is also an illusion. It's clear. Architectural evolution is really linear. You have different traditions, you have patrons. A patron can privilege a tradition, another patron can privilege another tradition. You have also techniques of construction and so on. So there is a huge number of topics that can provoke real progress and innovation, or which can provoke also to go back to another building type adopted before. But I try to understand that in the Western world you have the Roman prototypes and you have the orders of Vitruvius. And these orders, the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and composite order, that shows clearly, if you really studied Vitruvius, if you really studied also the Roman monument, or if it is just imagination, your own interpretation of such principles. So in the Eastern world, Vitruvian orders, I think they knew also Roman buildings and heard about Vitruvius. But in the Eastern world, this is not an important topic for patrons or for architects. So you can use a more ornamental language. You have more space for I will not say personal, but for individual expressions. So it is another type of innovation. I think in the Eastern work, it's really a play between a tradition and new ideas. And I tried to show this by the comparison of the mosque. You can, in 1543, invent entirely perfectly organized organism is renounced on the longitudinal axis, and some years later you can invent another mosque which ties directly to the Hagia Sophia. So there are different kinds, different typologies, and I think the concept of innovation is very, very different in the Eastern world than in the Western world. Your question on Ottoman culture, certainly there's a long tradition, before, and one can see also that there are so much patterns and so much typologies and so much the architecture of the 14th century in Turkey is very, very rich. It is an enormous repertoire of experiences and of different typologies, and certainly what had been done by Sinan in the 16th century is also directly linked to the experience in the 15th century. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for opening with this paper that addresses fundamental questions of design, architectural design, the production of architectural ideas and their realization, and to put all of this in the perspective, in the intercultural or transcultural perspective. I think you made a very important point with the functional element you mentioned, And I think that is also a very important parallel between Muslim architecture and Christian architecture, because from the ritual, it is clear that both church and mosque require a longitudinal direction. So, strictly functionally speaking, a centralized plan is something that runs against a rational concept of the building. And you mentioned this already for the Hagia Sophia, that combines the two, the dome, the centralizing dome, and the longitudinal axis. So one question might be, why then domes at all? Why then centralized plans at all? Were these ideas of the architects? Why did patrons agree to have domed, centralized buildings erected? Did patrons have the same ideas of the architects, or were they inspired by what the architects told them? So that is a question about the tradition of these concepts and how these concepts migrated not only between cultures but also between centuries, from one century to another. So is there do these concepts have a power of themselves?
Oh, that's a very, very, very difficult question. I think the idea of the centralized building is linked to theory of architecture, mainly Leon Battista Alberti. It is linked to humanism. To humanism thought, you have an idealized building of a perfect symmetry, and the human body is in the center and is a main reference. And with his eyes from the center of the building, he can appreciate all this marvelous organization. So I think it is a very, very theoretical concept, but I think also there were so much patrons very, very interested in this, because patrons had a marvelous culture of humanism. And they wanted also that the ideas of humanism can be realized in architecture. And as we know from the genesis of buildings, often the patron and his architecture begins with an idealized project. So I think the case of St. Peter von Bramante is a very, very good example for this. So somebody succeeded to convince the Pope to do this. Perhaps Leonardo, he was very famous for his rhetorical talent. Also Bramante, so he did say, okay, let's realize the new St. Peter as a centralized building, but some months later they realized that will not work. It will not work. So we have, and it was a big deception for Bramante not to do it, but to add a nave, and this becomes another thing. But I agree with you, a centralized building cannot fit for the functions of a big Christian church. It's not possible. It's not possible. But so there's something very typical of the Renaissance. There is an idea, there is an idealized form, and then there's a lot of debates. We cannot do it. We have to change it, and it has been repeated in so much other cases.
Questions?
Yes, thank you. I cannot speak for mosques, but for Christian architecture, there is a layer that has not been mentioned now, that is the symbolical meaning of the building, which is very important, especially in early Christian art. Renaissance, it might have been watered down a bit, but the dome is the heavens, and that is very clear from decorative images, from decorative motifs. The dome is the heaven that opens, that is symbolically Christ comes down with his heavenly host to celebrate the liturgy together with the priest and the people, the worshippers in church. So this whole symbolic meaning of spaces also plays a role in architecture. And that is a layer that I miss right now.
Yes, there is symbolical level of this, but in the Italian Renaissance, architect tried to make coincide the geometrical center and the liturgical center. So they tried to place the main altar below the cupola, so it becomes a big theater for liturgical service. But this is not for a mosque. In the mosque, it's to make higher. It's the heaven, but it is not linked directly to a liturgical function. It is linked to the assembly rooms where meeting the believers.
Yeah, but that is what by visiting Hagia Sophia, for example,
yes.
That is the first impression you get when you are inside the building. Is that the ceiling seems to float, the space seems to float around you. And that is indeed a heavenly sphere, more or less, which is, I think, but I don't know anything about mosques, is also the idea when entering a space of prayer, of worship, that you feel this connection. And from Christian architecture and this centralized plan for the nave is really very old, especially in Egypt, in southern Egypt and Nubia. What Peter Grossman, the scholar of Christian architecture in this area, called the Vierstutzenbau. You find it there too. It's with a dome in the center, going around, but with an apse in the east. And what I say, this symbolical meaning, this how you experience space is a layer that I think should not be overlooked in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. Leon Battista Alberti, as far as I know, is the first architect or theoretician who questioned about the conveniency of a centralized plan in a church, because he states that during the Mass, the audience can fit only on one side of the plan, and the other side is completely empty, so it's useless. And that, in my opinion, explains the fact that in terms of Christian churches, centralized plan is an appropriation, because at least in the Renaissance, is with Brunelleschi that we can that we see the first attempt of a centralized plan in Santa Maria degli Angeli in Florence. But at the same time, but before, centralized plan were mostly Brunelleschi himself designed all the sacristies, but that is a chapel. Yes. Taken from at the same time from the prototype of the baptistry of Padua, Romanesque, and at the same time, other attempt of centralized churches in the Renaissance comes from ancient Roman centralized temples. So what I mean is that the centralized plan for a Christian church is an appropriation of something that already existed with a different function. And about Sinan, what I find interesting is that we don't know how Sinan was exposed to Michelangelo. Gurlu Necipoglu, I think he wrote something about, but he was definitely exposed to Palladios, because Marcantonio Barbaro, the brother of Daniele Barbaro, the most important patron for Palladio, the one who appointed Palladio to illustrate his edition of Vitruvius, he was the ambassador, the Venetian ambassador in Constantinople during Sinan's years. So that could be a link between at least Palladio's architecture, but not Michelangelo. So, and also the other interesting part is that both Sinan and Palladio, they work at the very beginning of the Counter-Reformation, which is the era who marks the end of centralized churches. So, I mean, maybe this is an open question for all the speakers, but maybe it's not even a question. Mine is just a series of observations.
Yes, I know this. I know this had been underlined, the link between Sinan and Palladio, but at buildings in Sinan, I can't really see this. I can't. It is an interesting topic that one can discuss. But when I studied again the buildings, I cannot see a strong influence of Palladio. And the question of migration is always a very, very difficult question. Why perhaps he had something concerning St. Peter's, and why perhaps he had no drawings of Palladio? There's no document in which it is written. So I think it's necessary to think also to the patron. I think the Sultan was certainly very interested to the building site at St. Peter's, the main church of the Catholic religion. This is obvious to me. And so you have Michelangelo, you have Antonio da San Gallo, and I underlined it. It's perhaps not really an influence. It's a type of analogy or a type of assimilation of something of graphical material which was known. One don't know why and when and by which dynamism. And the second question, I didn't want to say that Renaissance are the first architects to use a centralized building. Certainly, there are so much centralized building in antiquity, baptisteries and so on. But to try this idea, strange idea, no? To try to use the centralized building for the main church of the Christianity, that is something very, very particular, I think.
Okay, I have a question for Dr. Radwa. It's so I don't work with the history of architecture or art. I work on modern history, Egypt. But there are two continuities coming from earlier periods, the time when we're talking about the Mamlukis and before that. So I'm just curious if in your research you have encountered something about the people who built mosques like Al-Azhar, Mamluki structures, were there skilled workers, unskilled, mostly Muslims, craftsmen from other religions? And the other question is on for these mosques where the columns were taken from churches and other places. Were there any connections to business people, merchants, or was it centralized political decisions to build these mosques, grand buildings?
Well, first of all, I hope that I understand your questions well. For the first question, we are talking, or the approach I mentioned here in the lecture today is about medieval period, mainly during the 10th to 13th century, which equivalent to in Egypt here is Fatimid period. So after that, if you are talking about the Mamluk period, yes, it's the golden age of architecture actually, and not only in Egypt, but in all the regions the Mamluk rule. Here in Egypt, in El Sham region, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and even El Hijaz, and maybe other places. So they were very clever for building, and you have a lot of examples. You can go to historic Cairo, you can go in Muazza Street, El Khalifa, El Hilmiya. You can find excellent examples of their, their sculpture, their decoration, the Arabic inscription, the even the Muqarnases. It's something great and prominent and related mainly to the Islamic architecture. You can go to the Sultan Hassan and to see how significant this architecture.
I mean, my question on labor is also about if you have information on the composition of the people who built the buildings. So there were certainly very skilled craftsmen, but other people who handled heavy lifting. Did they get paid? Were they hired for long? Were they collected from other places and taken by force to work on these places? Or I mean, do we know information about how they were?
We do some information. Maybe I don't have a lot of information about this topic, but we have some studies about the artisans worked there. You can say the supervisor, which was called in Arabic or the manuscripts shed al-amair. The shed in each field is the main supervisor, just like the contractor nowadays. It's not kind of architect. And we have some examples of the names of architects like Ibn Suyufi, and it's a whole family of architects or shed. So we have evidence. Sometimes they have their own signature. And back again to the Sultan Hassan, we found recently, Hassan Abdul Wahab found in one of the Iwans the name of the great builder or the supervisor of this massive and the most significant architecture, not only in Egypt, by its time, of course. As far as I know, no, we don't have something like they force builders or something. Sometimes, like for example, Qalawun, we have, I remember that, in Al-Maqrizi, I think he mentioned that when he was building his own Bimaristan in Al-Mu'azza Street, I mentioned it before, so he was, I think, force everyone is passing by on the street. I think this is, you need to listen. Yes, to hear a stone. And historians of this period, they feel that it's very shaming to do such an action. So this is not, it wasn't familiar. Maybe it's an exception case. And maybe we have another evidence we don't know now. So what is about your second question? Because I forgot.
It's about the money and resources for building the Fatimid mosques. Were they from political institutions or also from the world of business?
Who can ask the ruler where you bring your money? Who can able to ask this question? We are talking about architecture of authority. It's either Grand Vizier, which is now like a Grand Minister, or a Sultan, Khalifa actually, it's not Sultan. So who can ask him, where you bring your money? What is your resources? We have resources that we know and acknowledge that it has been reused because it's Roman or Corinthian, so it's very clear. But we, as far as I know, we don't have a lot of evidence where he take his wealth, so thank you. I have
one last question from you. This is an exception.
For Sabina.
Mish.
Yes, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, and I have comment. Your picture is great. I was very happy to see a skyline of this mosque and churches. In the same context of the same questions about the influence of Islamic and Byzantine architecture, especially in a city like Istanbul, how can you see structure like a Sultan Ahmad Mosque? We know I think all of us know about Hagia Sophia, which was before church, so it's not the case. What about the Sultan Ahmad Mosque? How can you describe or see the Byzantine influence on this Islamic building? Because they are very, very similar. The way in building, the elongated plan, of course the domes and the semi-domes. So here I think we have opposite case that here's, I feel that, I don't know if I'm right or not, that the Byzantine architecture are the dominant in the city. So if you can tell me more about this, I will be thankful. Thank you. I was curious about this, so maybe we can find an answer.
Yeah, it opens the discussion for our coffee break, I think. I would like to thank Dr. Radwa and Dr. Sabine. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank you all present in the room for listening to our morning, the first half of our morning session. And I invite you all for half an hour of coffee break. So please, thank you all. Welcome back after the coffee break. Now we have session 2, part 2 of the morning session about ideology and design in religious architecture. And I'm very happy to welcome our colleague, Dr. Luigi Rueda Galan from the Instituto de Historia in Madrid. And he will present to us his research about the conversion of the mosques of Al-Andalus between ideology and pragmatism. Please welcome Dr. Louis.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank first the organizers for their kind invitation, and particularly Fatma Kesk for all her hard work in organizing this interesting event. Well, in the second half of the 11th century, after the civil war, the Fitna, which caused the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate of Al-Andalus, the Christian kingdoms of the north of the Iberian Peninsula began to reverse the political and military balance. And by the end of the century, they had become the dominant power. This situation was associated with a drive for territorial expansion that led to the conquest of many important Andalusian cities. One of the first actions of the Christian conquerors after taking a city was to convert the Friday mosque into a cathedral or a major church. The operation had, of course, a strong symbolic meaning of victory and subjugation of the Muslim population. But it also had a practical purpose from the point of view of territorial control, since the Friday mosques of Al-Andalus concentrated much of the political power of their cities, in addition to accumulating numerous more main properties, the habus or okaf, which consisted of lands and real estate, etc. Given the differences that exist between Islam and Christianity in liturgies and the symbolic and aesthetic aspects, one might think that the buildings of the Andalusian mosques of the hypostyle type would not be suitable to meet the special needs of a cathedral or a great church, and would therefore have to be replaced by new Christian buildings. But the reality is that Christians generally preserve the mosques for centuries without altering their structure, adapting them to the functions of the Christian liturgy with only slight modifications. For example, the Cathedral of Toledo was housed in its former mosque from 1086, shortly after the conquest of the city, until the beginning of the 14th century. Up until the middle of the 15th century, a good part of the minaret still existed. In Seville, the new cathedral, founded in 1248 inside the Friday Mosque, was not demolished until after 1433, with most of the sand, the courtyard, and the minaret still preserved today. Not to mention, obviously, the Creative Mosque of Córdoba, which was converted into a cathedral in 1236, of which most of the original structure has been kept. All this makes me wonder why, if the hypostyle buildings were not suitable for the Christian liturgy, nor for the religious and power representational needs of the church and the Christian elites, why then the buildings were preserved for centuries? And there are several reasons that could explain this. The historiography of art has often insisted on two fundamental reasons. The first lies in the strong symbolic component and the message of domination involved in appropriating the most representative building of the conquered community and transforming it into its opposite. The second, and this is maybe more evident in the written sources, is the esteem in which the kings and Christian elites held some of its most important monuments. For example, King Alfonso X of Castile, a few decades after the conversion of the Mosque of Cordoba, in view of the poor state of preservation of the building, wrote the following to the chapter of the cathedral. As Don Fernando, Bishop of Cordoba, the cathedral chapter, the Dominican and Franciscan friars, the city council have informed me, in the church of Santa Maria, that is the converted mosque, there is much damage in the wooden ceilings, and many other repairs are needed. So it would be convenient for all of us to collect funds to carry out said repairs. For it would be a shame to lose such a noble building. The king's intentions to preserve the building in a state close to its original condition is made clear when, 2 years later, he writes to the city council, "Because it is my firm will that the Cathedral of Cordoba be better cared for, and nothing of it be allowed to fall or be destroyed, I order all the Muslim carpenters, masons, and blacksmiths of Cordoba to work 2 days a year on the repair of the building." In reality, however, without denying these factors, when I delve into the reasons for the preservation of the mosques through the study of written sources, but also the architectural analysis, I came to the conclusion that more than ideological factors, a pragmatic spirit centered on the efficient use of material and economic resources prevailed in the conversion of the mosques of Al-Andalus. If the results of these operations, or if the result of these operations was compatible with the representative needs of the church, with the image and symbolic message of Christianity, so much the better. But often this was not the primary object. In my opinion, new cathedrals were not built to replace the mosque for two main reasons. The first is that, especially from the 13th century on, the Christian kingdoms had gained so much territory, so many cities in such a short time, that it was not economically feasible to build 20, 30, or 40 cathedrals or major churches at the same time. But it also must be taken into account that despite the territorial gains, the Christians would not have total control of the peninsula until 1492. And the warlike conflict with Al-Andalus continued, either after the Almohads took control, the incursions of the Marinids from the 13th century onwards, or after the creation of the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada. To build a cathedral in a militarized and stable frontier was a great risk, since it could be destroyed in an attack, as it actually happened in some cases. And it was therefore a risk that the Christians did not begin to afford until the very late in the 15th century, when the superiority over the Kingdom of Granada was already irreversible. Well, in the time I have left, I will present some examples of architectural operations aimed at adapting the mosque to the liturgy and Christian symbology, in which we can perceive the priority given by the conquerors to this approach based on efficiency in the use of resources and pragmatism, over other values of a more ideological nature, which, I repeat, also played an important role. To begin to illustrate some of these operations, I will focus on a former mosque in Toledo, now known as Cristo de la Luz, the Christ of Light. It was actually built in 390 AH, obviously, under the patronage of Ahmad bin al-Hadidi, a prominent al-Faqih, member of the Banu al-Hadidi, one of the most influential families in the city. The building continued to function as a mosque for almost a century after the conquest of the city, but was finally converted into the Chapel of the Holy Cross by the Knights Hospitaller in 1183. It was a small square oratory organized by 4 central columns in which Visigothic capitals from the 7th century were reused, which, as we can see, generate 9 small domes. When it was converted, the original structure was almost completely preserved, of which only the mihrab is missing. The operation carried out was simple to change the liturgical orientation, adding an apse directed east to west, that of the Christian liturgy. On the outside, the 2 parts present a great stylistic and decorative unity. So much that maybe to the untrained eye it might seem that they were built at the same time. The apse is a semicircular structure built with materials similar to those of the mosque. You can see brick walls and a small podium built with a technique similar to the Roman opus mixtum, very popular in local architecture, and made with irregular stones and rows of bricks. It is a technically simple intervention, inexpensive, and that allowed, with very few resources, to adapt the previous space to the needs of a church. An operation that was often carried out in other cases. For example, the mosque of the fortress of Al-Monaster La Real, built around the end of the 9th, beginning of the 10th century, and also converted by the order of the hospital around 1230. Here, too, we can see that the only important modifications to the interior were the change of orientation and the construction of an apse facing northeast to house the altar of the church. In another interesting aspect of the conversion of the mosque of Ben al-Hadidi is the continuity in the use of materials and the style of the exterior decoration to keep the building aesthetic unity. A language similar to that of the original mosque is used, but with variations that make the forms convenient or acceptable for the architectural tradition of the Christian Toledo, which naturally was strongly influenced by Andalusi architecture. An important part of the churches built in Toledo in the 12th and 13th centuries preserve an apse with the same form and decoration, such as this one, Santa Leocadia, San Vicente, Cristo de la Vega, or Santiago de el Arrabal. In the process of Christianization of the Mosque of Córdoba, which went from the 13th to the 16th centuries, the adaptation of the original decoration with minor variations in order to make the image of the building more palatable to Christian tastes is particularly important. In any case, despite some intervention that affected the appearance and identity of the building, a sense some other were carried out with enormous ingenuity and a sense of efficiency and economy of means. To me, one of the most interesting is that performed in the middle of the 15th century on what is known as Postigo de Palacio, or the Palace Gate, so-called because it was located in front of the Palace of the Bishops of Córdoba and was the main entrance they used to access the building during the Middle Ages. It is the only entrance to the former prayer room of the mosque whose decoration has been modified. As you can see, I consider by an astute and inexpensive operation, the decorative elements have been adapted to the late Gothic style without changing the structure of the facade. For comparison, I show one of the oldest gates of the mosque, that of Bab al-Mardum, Bab al-Buzara, the vizier's gate, built at the end of the 8th century. The ultimate purpose of the modification in this case, however, was ideological or symbolic, since it was the gate through which a bishop entered the cathedral. And for reasons of decorum, it needed to have a more Christian appearance. As I said, in Córdoba, the interventions of the building were increasingly aggressive towards the original structure. However, still in 1372, when the new royal chapel was built in the center of the prayer hall, the first structure to significantly alter its original form, a distinctly Andalusi language was used to ensure that the new construction did not visually clash with the rest of the building. A structure that replicates that of the Quba, widely used for mausoleums in the Islamic world, but with a decoration that no longer reproduced that of the Umayyad period present in the rest of the mosque, but that which was then in vogue in Nasrid, Granada. The most visually striking structure from the Christian period is the new transept, built in the 16th century. Although this was an extremely, as I said, aggressive intervention in the original appearance of the building, it is possible, however, to detect a certain respectful attitude on the part of the architects towards the previous construction. The architect responsible for the first phase of the transept, Hernán Ruiz the Elder, maintained the original structure in the lower part, adapting the new to the existing with an approach that seems to me, at least, to have been carried out with some care and delicacy in a kind of seam that sews the two structures together. One of the greatest problems faced by the architects responsible for the conversion of the mosque was to adapt a rectangular building with a hypostyle structure, like the vast majority of mosques in Western Islam, so that it could fulfill the same functions as a church based on the basilica model. The reality is that exact adaptation was impossible. So priority was given to providing liturgical functionality to the space before achieving traditional architectural forms of Western Christianity. The best example of this phenomenon is the conversion of the Mosque of Córdoba, where after a 90-degree turn in the orientation of the liturgy, the new church began to be organized around the former axial nave of the Umayyad Mosque, taking advantage of the skylight here, built by the Caliph al-Hakam II over the primitive mihrab to install the high altar. As you can see, an appropriate place for the altar, since it was one of the most lavishly decorated places in the mosque. In front of it, a choir was built for the chapter and not behind the altar, as had been the custom in the Iberian cathedral since the renovation of the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in the 11th century. On either sides of the former Maxura, were the Eucharistic chapel, or the Sagrario chapel, another particularity of medieval Iberian churches. And the funerary chapels, all of this, of the noble families that took part in the conquest of the city in 1236. And in this side of the oratory was built the first royal chapel, built by King Alfonso X. Well, this arrangement left a large part here, a large part of the prayer hall unused, which is obvious that there was no problem because it was never used. We found a similar operation in the Cathedral of Jaén, although with a more efficient use of the space since it was a smaller mosque than Cordoba. In addition to the change in orientation, a main chapel attached to the eastern wall and a choir were built between the pillars in front of it, as in Cordoba. In this case, a pseudo-basilica plan was generated by the creation of a wider central nave by eliminating a row of supports. In Seville, where the mosque was only slightly smaller than in Cordoba, the distribution of the space and its liturgical organization was somewhat more rational, since a large funerary chapel was built in the center of the prayer to house the tomb of the Castilian king who conquered the city, Ferdinand III, his wife, and his son Alfonso X. Finally, the reuse of minarets as bell towers was perhaps the easiest adaptation to make, since form and function were very similar in the two types of structures. Both the minarets of Al-Andalus and the bell towers of the churches of the northern kingdoms were square. And in many cases, as we can see in the tower of the Church of El Salvador in Toledo, were built around a central pillar made of bricks on which the stairs and the outer wall were built. They differ only in the upper part, although in both cases it was intended to house a source of sound, a pavilion for the muezzins to announce the as-salah, the daily prayer, and a second body occupied by a bell in the case of churches. Thus, when a mosque was converted, the minaret remained virtually unchanged. In Seville, the monumental minaret of its Friday Mosque, one of the largest in Western Islam, known in Spanish as La Giralda, was built in 1198. During the Almohad period, the massive Renaissance-style belfry that can be seen today was built well after the Middle Ages in 1568. And although there is an interesting unity in the materials and the techniques used with the original construction, it was designed with an obvious symbolic intention of celebrating the triumph of Christianity. But in reality, the appearance of the tower changed very little within the conversion of the mosque and the construction of this belfry. A painting of the Seville Cathedral from 1555, a few years before its transformation, shows us that the Christian only removed the metal finial of the minaret, here, metal finial of the minaret with the three spheres, known in Al-Andalus as jamur, or simply golden apples, to replace it with a larger bell, as you can see here in the painting. The same thing happened in the Mosque of Cordoba, as we can verify thanks to several visual sources from the late Middle Ages, such as this illustration from a late 15th century manuscript. Yes, as you can see, the only change made to the tower was the addition of this large bell on which the jamur, the three spheres, was placed with a cross on top of it. That is for sure very symbolic, no? And I would like to conclude with a reflection. Since the middle of the 20th century, the relations between the different religious communities of the Iberian Peninsula have been interpreted by historians from two fundamentally opposing paradigms. The first is that of the Reconquista, reconquest, defended since the 19th century by the most nationalist sectors in Spain and by many historians too, according to which the Spanish people, the Iberian Christians, in an essentialistic sense, were engaged in a civilizing struggle to regain the lost homeland, which would come with the supposed construction of national unity after the conquest of Granada in 1492. This is obviously an interpretation based on romantic nationalist visions full of propaganda, which has little to do with the reality that the material and literary sources tell us, which is much more complex and multifaceted. On the other hand, there is an interpretation based on the concept of coexistence, convivencia, coined by the Spanish historian Americo Castro, and according to which the development of medieval Iberian societies was based on a dialectic that included Christian, Jewish, Muslim cultural elements. This is a vision that, despite its virtues and good intentions, does not fully correspond to the historical reality and has even degenerated into an idealized vision of medieval Iberia as a multicultural paradise. But the sources and the evidence are stubborn and constantly contradict these interpretations, as the reality is that interreligious conflict and violence were a constant both in Al-Andalus and in the Christian kingdoms. The study of the phenomenon of the conversions of places of worship allows us to confirm that over and above the ideological and symbolic factors that certainly existed, a key element in the relationship between the different communities was pragmatism and efficiency, in material terms, but also political, social, etc. Or to use the term introduced by the historian Brian Catlos, convenience, conveniencia, instead of convivencia. My intention, and I finish with this, my intention with this study is ultimately to broaden the theoretical framework and to introduce other factors that are less traditionally taken into account than the ideological, in order to try to move towards a new interpretative paradigm that offers more scientific and complete answers to transcultural phenomena in medieval Iberia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louis. It was really very enlightening on the topic of conversion of the churches and mosques. We have time for one question only. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have visited before Cordoba and I feel shocked how we can find all these Islamic architectural elements beside all these Christian motifs. How people, this is something is far from the presentation. How people find this nowadays? How they act? Is it a church, still a church, or it's a monumental place? Because we have example, we've talking today, Sabina have the example of, for example, Hagia Sophia, which was church, and then it converted to mosque, and then museum, and returned back to be a mosque. So how people deal with such a big and great conversion of the great Mosque of Cordoba? Yes, and if you have more information about, because I know there was a big problem after Reconquista. For now, can you have some information about the people? How can they see their own history?
Yeah, well, maybe we can delve into this deeper in the discussion. But now, it depends on the person who approached the mosque. So if you are Muslim, you have to experience one thing. If you are not...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is it a real mosque? They see a mosquita. They see cathedral mosquita. I think that is an exceptional architecture in the whole world.
It's from the... Strictly speaking, it's not a mosque anymore. Since the 13th century, it's a cathedral. So it's a cathedral built over a mosque. So to me, this should end discussions. But we don't discuss, for example, Hagia Sophia. It's a mosque now, so it's a mosque. But in Turkey, have decided it is a mosque. It is a mosque. Okay. So for me as a historian, my approach is very different from that.
Yes, I'm talking about from
people.
The point of view of art history, not for Muslims or Christians.
Yeah, from art history. Well, from art history is clear. For art history, it's not a building, it's a document. It's a testimony of history, because it has all these interventions that may seem so aggressive to the building. To me, are testimonies of history. As a historian, as an art historian. So, I don't know if I responded, but maybe we can talk later more.
Thank you very much, Louis. Now we move to our second presentation of the second session. We welcome Dr. Mathieu Lours from the EPHE, Équipe Istrata. This presentation is in French. And the topic is l'orientalisme dans l'architecture des édifices religieux en Afrique du Nord à l'époque coloniale, réappropriation ou synthèse. Mathieu, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour à tous. Merci aux organisateurs de cette manifestation de nous donner à nouveau l'occasion de réfléchir au dialogue, aux complémentarités entre les architectures essentiellement chrétiennes et musulmanes, sur justement la question de savoir pourquoi dans un territoire l'architecture religieuse est symptomatique de l'identité des personnes, des lieux et évidemment de réappropriation historique. Pour éprouver ces questions, il y a un laboratoire particulièrement intéressant qui est celui du monde colonial français. Compte tenu des 25 minutes qui sont à notre disposition, j'ai d'ailleurs réduit le propos au Maghreb. Le Maghreb est particulièrement intéressant sur cette question parce que c'est un territoire sur lequel, au sein duquel les chrétientés autochtones ont disparu suite aux invasions arabo-musulmanes et les derniers chrétiens autochtones sont attestés vers l'an 1000. Il y en a encore un petit peu au début du XIe siècle, mais soit ils se convertissent, soit ils partent pour l'Italie. Et donc on a un effacement de la présence effective des communautés chrétiennes, à la différence de la Méditerranée orientale. Et on a à nouveau une présence chrétienne au XVIIe siècle en raison de la présence d'esclaves chrétiens, puis à nouveau, dans une perspective complètement renversée, puisque les chrétiens au XVIIe siècle sont des dominés, des esclaves, ils deviennent dominants de manière très violente pendant la période coloniale, ce qui change encore une fois la perspective. Alors, avec trois situations différentes. En Algérie, c'est une conquête, une appropriation coloniale, avec une colonie de peuplement, avec environ, au moment de l'indépendance en 1962, 900 000 personnes originaires de métropole ou possédant la nationalité française, dont sans doute 800 000 catholiques environ. En Tunisie, on a en 1881 le traité du Bardo qui fait de la Tunisie un protectorat. Au sein de ce protectorat existe déjà une très nombreuse communauté catholique, essentiellement italienne, installée depuis le début du XIXe siècle dans certains quartiers. Et ensuite, on a également un apport migratoire français. Et au Maroc, avec le traité de Casablanca en 1912, le protectorat est établi, mais la communauté française est essentiellement composée d'administrateurs. Il n'y a pas de propriétaires fonciers comme en Tunisie ou en Algérie. Donc on a trois situations très différentes. Et puis il faut ensuite parler de l'exception de trois cités qui ont été espagnoles sur le temps long, Ceuta et Melilla qui sont toujours espagnoles, et Oran qui est restée espagnole jusqu'à la fin du XVIIIe siècle et qui devient française lors de la conquête de 1830. Donc, sur un arc chronologique très large, entre 1830 et 1962, il faut dans ces territoires fournir aux catholiques un équipement cultuel et se pose la question du style, de l'esthétique de ces équipements cultuels, mais également de leur fonctionnalité. Trois possibilités existent. Soit convertir une mosquée et en faire une église, quelque chose qui ne s'était pas pratiqué depuis des siècles dans le monde occidental. Donc les Français sont confrontés à une innovation. Il y avait certes le cas de Sainte-Anne à Jérusalem, mais c'est un cadeau du sultan à une communauté religieuse, c'est donc un petit peu différent. Et Sainte-Anne avait été une église. Au Maghreb, aucun des édifices n'avait été une église auparavant. Deuxième possibilité, construire l'église en adoptant un historicisme. Cet historicisme montre que les catholiques ont connu une très forte tension entre un historicisme romano-byzantin et un historicisme mauresque. Et on va essayer de comprendre le sens de ces tensions. Et dans un troisième temps, voir pourquoi au XXe siècle, l'adoption d'un vocabulaire architectural moderne pour les cathédrales permet justement de sortir la question du christianisme de la question de la violence coloniale et d'adopter, au contraire, un nouvel ensemble esthétique. Donc on a en fait trois coïnées architecturales qui s'opposent. La première, c'est la coïnée arabo-mauresque, bien que revisitée, réappropriée, jamais vraiment archéologique. La deuxième, c'est la coïnée romano-byzantine, qui permet de repenser un bassin méditerranéen entièrement chrétien. Et la troisième, c'est la coïnée de l'architecture internationale moderne, qui permet de penser l'édifice de culte avec des intersections mosquées-cathédrales qui s'inscrivent dans un champ plus large de l'édifice cultuel. Et vous voyez quel est le grand exclu, c'est le néo-gothique. Jamais on n'a pensé à du néo-gothique parce que le néo-gothique est exclusivement européen du Nord et ne permet pas de justifier en quelque sorte cette rechristianisation coloniale. Examinons chronologiquement et thématiquement ces trois possibilités. Alors, on voit la touche Enter ici. Voilà. Premièrement, de la mosquée à l'église et ensuite de l'église à la mosquée, puisque les deux cathédrales qui avaient été installées dans des mosquées sont toutes les deux redevenues des mosquées en 1962. Donc on a sur 130 ans de différence une reconversion. Le premier exemple, le plus marquant, c'est la mosquée Ketchaoua à Alger. La mosquée Ketchaoua à Alger, c'est une mosquée qui a été bâtie une première fois en 1602 et une deuxième fois en 1794. C'est très intéressant parce que c'est une mosquée qui témoignait déjà d'une domination. Elle témoignait de la domination des Ottomans sur les territoires arabo-berbères d'Algérie. Et c'est une mosquée sur le modèle ottoman du point de vue architectural et arabo-berbère du point de vue des décors. Vous voyez les stucs qui sont très différents des décorations des mosquées ottomanes, mais la structure, une mosquée de plan centré, avec un mihrab ici installé dans une galerie périmétrale, c'est vraiment le modèle ottoman et la décoration. C'était déjà une fusion de type de domination extérieure que vous aviez dans cette mosquée. Cette mosquée, suite à la conquête de 1830, est cédée par le moufti aux autorités françaises. On a un discours en 1832 du grand moufti d'Alger qui explique que c'est le même Dieu qui restera honoré dans l'Église et que c'est donc d'une certaine manière une continuité. Et on va voir qu'on va retrouver cette idée du don libre de l'Église au moment 1962. Même si dans un cas comme dans l'autre, c'est lié en fait à un nouveau contexte politique qui ne laisse guère le choix. Ce sont des choix qui sont évidemment contraints. Et le fait de donner permet d'éviter d'être saisi et de garder la face, d'une certaine manière, dans le cadre d'une guerre coloniale ou d'un processus d'indépendance. Et je vous ai confronté ces deux visuels pour vous montrer la manière dont la continuité s'est opérée de manière très simple. Vous avez le mihrab ici, devant lequel on va placer le maître-autel, entre en parfaite continuité. La vasque à ablution devient les fonds baptismaux, La rampe d'escalier de la chaire, le siège de l'imam en marbre devient la base. On a une réutilisation de l'espace, du mobilier, et ça va même plus loin, parce qu'on a une sorte d'acculturation de la mosquée était destinée à deux choses. De ce côté-ci et de ce côté-là, elles abritaient les femmes pendant la prière. Vous aviez le bey d'Alger qui siégeait, c'était la mosquée du bey d'Afrique du Nord, qui va prendre la place du bey. Continuité parfaite, non seulement des liturgies, mais des fidèles. Tout ça va changer à partir de 1845. À partir de 1845, on prend des décisions qui vont interrompre cette continuité. C'est un moment où on doit reconstruire. Voyez le plan ici de la mosquée Ketchawa, le palais du bey, la mosquée Ketchawa, avec son mihrab, qui est donc ici, en direction de la Mecque. 1845 et jusqu'en 1866, plusieurs architectes se succèdent, et en particulier Albert Ballu, en 1866, qui construit la nouvelle façade de la cathédrale. Et vous voyez ce qui se passe. On va démolir la quasi-totalité de la mosquée entre 1845 et 66. On ne va 1845 et 66. On ne va garder en réalité que le mur qui est ici, que vous voyez là sur cette photographie ancienne. Avec cette décoration en stuc et la trace des anciennes tribunes. Ballu va reconstruire tout le mur de gauche sur le modèle du mur de droite. Imaginez un arc triomphal, un dôme, un transept. Et les sculpteurs Falconis et Latour vont rédupliquer les stucs. Il y a donc une démarche archéologique très intéressante. C'est le moment où l'archéologie arabe fascine les bâtisseurs français. Et on a donc l'idée de construire pour une cathédrale à l'intérieur. Et à l'extérieur, on imagine une façade harmonique d'église avec deux tours et une porte centrale qui ne peut pas exister dans une mosquée parce que la mosquée n'a pas le plan basilical et que la façade harmonique, c'est une évolution occidentale de l'architecture en Normandie au XIe siècle. Donc cette imagination d'une façade harmonique, pourquoi lui avoir donné la forme d'une mosquée avec des minarets? Mais ça n'est pas le modèle du minaret macaire que vous avez ici. Donc vous avez non seulement un résumé de l'archive, vous avez un véritable des éléments ottomans, des éléments égyptiens pour une cathédrale en Afrique du Nord. On a donc voulu avoir une sorte de résumé de ce qu'aurait pu être une architecture islamique idéalisée mise au service du christianisme. Jusqu'au XIe siècle. Les édifices de culte qu'on avait en Syrie, qu'on avait en Espagne. Pourquoi avoir refusé la coïnée basilicale? On aurait très bien pu raser cette mosquée et construire une néo... On a voulu en quelque sorte donner l'idée politique dans l'idée d'ancrer la France dans les traditions algériennes. C'est Jeannot, le gouverneur général d'Algérie, qui en 1904 demande que les postes et les mairies soient désormais construites en mauresque. Donc le clergé avait, d'une certaine manière, précédé les choses. Le projet le plus spectaculaire, c'était le projet d'un certain Aimé pour la cathédrale d'Oran. Oran a une cathédrale catholique qui est l'église Saint-Louis, qui date du début du XIXe siècle, qui s'avère trop petite dans les années 1880. Parce que l'Oranie, c'est vraiment la région d'Algérie où la population européenne était la plus nombreuse, essentiellement italienne et espagnole d'origine d'ailleurs. Et Aimé propose ce contre-projet. À Oran, on avait des projets romano-byzantins. Et Aimé dit non, ce qu'il faut ici, c'est acculturer l'art mauresque. Cette reconstruction, cette appropriation, l'art mauresque évidemment relève d'un regard occidental. Et voilà ce qu'il propose. C'est grosso modo le plan de Ballu, qu'on va voir plus tard, mais avec un dôme qui ressemble aux proportions d'un dôme du Tempietto de Bramante, mais avec cette gigantesque coupole, ce gigantesque dôme outrepassé qui est immédiatement la cible de la critique. On a une lettre non signée dans les archives du diocèse d'Oran en disant qu'on ne peut pas construire une poire géante sur la cathédrale. Et qu'on passe ici les bornes du bon goût, avec ces deux minarets ici, parce que ça la ferait trop ressembler à une villa, à une demeure de plaisance, à une folie dans un jardin, et pas à un édifice de culte, et que ça n'honorerait même pas le culte musulman que de le caricaturer de cette manière. Donc on a un tollé face à ce projet. En revanche, des projets synthétiques, comme Notre-Dame d'Afrique, mais qui est une basilique et pas une cathédrale, peuvent mieux fonctionner. Pour des cathédrales, qu'est-ce qu'on a? On va avoir, excusez-moi, j'ai une inversion ici, deux grands modèles qui sont bâtis par le même architecte. Et cet architecte, c'est un prêtre. C'est l'abbé Joseph Pougnet, qui est un proche de Monseigneur Lavigerie et qui souhaite l'acculturation. Et c'est à lui que Monseigneur Lavigerie confie la construction de ce qui était à l'époque la cathédrale la plus titrée d'Afrique, c'est la primatiale Saint-Louis de Carthage, qui remplace la petite chapelle construite avant l'époque coloniale en style gothique pour honorer Saint-Louis. Cette chapelle gothique construite pour honorer Saint-Louis en 1842 était tout naturellement gothique. Mais honorer le lieu de la mort de Saint-Louis par une église mauresque dans le but d'évangéliser l'Afrique, puisque c'est la mission des Pères Blancs à laquelle appartient Monseigneur Lavigerie, premier primat de Carthage, c'est quand même une démarche complètement différente. Et là, vous allez voir Pougnet réutiliser des éléments totalement innovants pour cette cathédrale. D'abord, vous avez la façade harmonique qui revient, et une façade harmonique avec des proportions qui sont celles de la cathédrale d'Angoulême, restaurée par Abadie. Un tympan ici très haut. Vous retrouvez exactement les restaurations orientalisantes menées par Abadie dans les cathédrales du Périgord et des Charentes. Il en va de même pour le dôme, ici. En revanche, et il en va de même pour les petites, je ne sais pas quoi d'ailleurs, les petites structures de fantaisie issues de ces éléments poitevins. Les créneaux, quant à eux, sont des créneaux qui rappellent le temple de Baal à Palmyre et qui rappellent les créneaux du temple de Salomon. Donc là, on a un import, ou bien les créneaux aussi de certaines mosquées égyptiennes, les plus anciennes, l'Aïm Touloum par exemple. Donc on a encore cette volonté de synthèse. Et à l'intérieur, on est dans une inventio. Dans une inventio parce qu'il n'existe rien de tel dans l'architecture religieuse musulmane. C'est une transposition des palais d'Al-Andalus. C'est une transposition des patios des palais égyptiens et marocains. Ce sont donc des architectures civiles arabo-musulmanes qui sont transposées dans un édifice de culte chrétien, alors qu'aucune mosquée n'a jamais ressemblé à ça à l'intérieur, ou très peu. Donc là, vous voyez l'aménagement liturgique, le sanctuaire qui était placé ici, les tribunes, c'est en fait, structurellement parlant, une basilique qui ressemble un peu à ces basiliques à deux niveaux, qui perdurent dans les églises coptes, sauf que dans aucune basilique à deux niveaux, vous n'avez une tribune derrière le sanctuaire. Donc on est vraiment dans une invention du XIXe siècle, avec l'élément archétypal, qui est l'arc lancéolé, et puis l'utilisation du plafond à caisson. Donc elle est devenue, depuis 1966, un lieu d'exposition culturelle, ce qui rend parfaitement raison de cette plasticité. La deuxième réalisation de Pougnet, excusez-moi, c'est la basilique d'Annaba, qui est aujourd'hui pro-cathédrale du diocèse de Constantine. Pougnet à Annaba, pour honorer le lieu de la mort de Saint-Augustin, enfin le lieu, pardon, excusez-moi, pas de la mort, mais de la naissance de Saint-Augustin, eh bien il y a cette idée-là, on aurait dû offrir à Saint-Augustin, on aurait pu lui offrir une basilique paléochrétienne, puisqu'il vivait au IVe siècle. On lui a offert une église hispano-mauresque. Et Pougnet propose les mêmes traits caractéristiques qu'à Carthage, pour honorer ici Saint-Augustin. Et vous voyez que Saint-Augustin, avant la conquête islamique, Saint-Louis, qui est un occidental, sont honorés par des églises mauresques. Ce qui est un paradoxe qui a pour but la réacculturation du christianisme dans le contexte de l'Algérie du XIXe siècle. Néanmoins, ce choix, et je vais aller vite, ce choix n'a pas été adopté partout. À Tunis, vous le voyez, ce sont des références à l'art roman et à l'art byzantin, avec évidemment quelques accents mauresques quand même ici, mais ce grand portail, les arcades ici ressemblent en fait à la relecture de l'art byzantin que faisaient les architectes français, comme Abadie par exemple, ou comme Bossan également, à Notre-Dame de Fourvière, qui lui aussi regarde vers l'orientalisme. Et ça permettait, ce choix-là, de créer une coïnée avec ce qui se passe en France à la même époque. La cathédrale de Marseille, par Espérandieu, rentre dans cette typologie où l'Orient se fond avec l'Occident. Vous avez à la fois la dichromie des églises romanes de Pise, vous avez des coupoles qui sont purement inventées, et regardez la manière dont la façade de la Major ressemble à la façade de la cathédrale de Tunis. C'est presque superposable, et vous avez dans la Major un baldaquin avec des colonnes d'onyx qui proviennent de Tunisie. Donc vous avez ce dialogue, cette récupération du paléo-chrétien par le byzantin. Donc cette synthèse, cette sorte de continuité, elle avait pour avantage d'ancrer la colonie dans l'art de la métropole et de rappeler à la métropole ses ancrages méditerranéens qui correspondent aux options géopolitiques. Le gothique, c'est l'art germanique, donc avec toute la polémique de l'Alsace et de la Lorraine. Le romano-byzantin, c'est l'art du bassin méditerranéen, là où effectivement on réussissait à avoir une expansion, là où la présence allemande bloquait la France. Le grand projet romano-byzantin, c'est celui de la cathédrale d'Oran, avec le projet de Balue, qui finalement a prévalu sur le projet d'Aimé. Et vous voyez que là, c'est vraiment une église néo-romane. Il y a très peu de byzantins dans le premier projet. Ça va jusqu'au plan, qui ressemble beaucoup à celui de la cathédrale de Marseille, avec ses chapelles rayonnantes. Dans la réalisation, l'aspect byzantin a finalement été souligné par ce grand arc de la façade, mais ce sont des modifications liées au fait que Balue, la construction continue jusqu'en 1913, doit finalement adopter une structure en béton avec une collaboration avec les frères Perret, ce qui fait en fait de la cathédrale d'Oran un pont vers la modernité. Et la cathédrale d'Oran a été convertie en lieu culturel comme celle de Carthage. Elle sert aujourd'hui de bibliothèque. Et vous voyez comment le grand volume rendu possible par la structure en béton permet de s'adapter à celle d'une grande salle de lecture. Voilà la structure. Dernière possibilité, en 2 minutes, c'est celle d'utiliser le vocabulaire moderne pour finalement repenser l'architecture des cathédrales en dehors du contexte de la domination coloniale. La domination coloniale était liée à la réappropriation d'un dialogue, un espace chrétien conquis par une puissance musulmane, conquis à nouveau par une puissance chrétienne, et qu'est-ce qu'on fait lorsque ces territoires voient émerger des communautés autonomes et lorsque l'indépendance arrive? Le risque était que la cathédrale soit considérée non pas comme un outil pastoral de l'Église, mais comme l'instrument d'une puissance étrangère, la France. Et l'Église catholique, dès les années 1930, dès les premières indépendances, l'Égypte, l'Irak, comprend qu'on doit dépasser cela et proposer un christianisme qui parle de manière universelle, sans pour autant abandonner des éléments d'ancrage. Adrien Laforgue, le frère du poète Paul Laforgue, est appelé en 1921 pour donner un projet pour la cathédrale de Rabat, donc en plein dans la ville qui est le signe de la domination française. Il associe pour cette cathédrale de Rabat la structure en béton, des formes résolument modernes, l'emboîtement des volumes, avec des références qui sont celles du lieu dans lequel se trouve l'église. Les minarets, enfin les clochers, excusez-moi, dont les volumes rappellent les minarets, évidemment, des cités impériales marocaines, mais aussi les éléments en bois des minarets en pisé du Mali. C'est-à-dire que cette cathédrale de Rabat regarde aussi vers l'Afrique subsaharienne. Le système de claustras que vous avez ici rappelle aussi les claustras des mosquées maghrébines, tout comme vous avez la trace ici avec les arcs surbaissés à l'intérieur. Et finalement, on abandonne totalement la référence avec la cathédrale du Sacré-Cœur à Alger, entreprise par Paul Herbé et Jean Lecouteur en 1956. Cette cathédrale d'Alger, elle est construite pour permettre de rendre à la communauté musulmane l'ancienne mosquée Ketchaoua, devenue cathédrale Saint-Philippe. Et en 1962, l'évêque d'Alger va solennellement, l'archevêque d'Alger va solennellement rendre la cathédrale à la communauté musulmane et faire cohabiter à Alger désormais une grande mosquée qui est celle qui était la grande mosquée jusqu'à la conquête française et une cathédrale qui ne dit plus rien de l'époque coloniale. Elle s'inscrit dans la modernité qui est celle de l'État algérien qui développe une idée de socialisme arabe avec le FLN dans les années 1960 et qui adopte lui aussi une architecture moderne sans référence mauresque. Dans les bâtiments construits à Alger dans les années 1960, il faut s'inscrire dans la modernité des jeunes nations, un peu comme Brasilia, un peu comme Jakarta. Si vous voulez, les références historicistes reviennent plus tard. Et donc aujourd'hui, on n'a plus aucune cathédrale mauresque qui fonctionne au Maghreb, à part celle d'Annaba. Toutes les autres sont devenues des lieux culturels ou des lieux de culte musulmans. Mais elles fonctionnent très bien dans ce nouveau contexte. Il n'y a pas eu besoin de transformer leur aspect extérieur pour qu'elles soient identifiées comme bibliothèques, comme mosquées. Elles se sont inscrites dans le patrimoine des États qui sont redevenus indépendants. Tout comme la communauté chrétienne continue d'utiliser les cathédrales marocaines, la cathédrale de Tunis et la cathédrale d'Alger. Donc cette plasticité permet aujourd'hui à ces cathédrales d'exister à la fois dans un paradigme universel, dans un paradigme de l'histoire de l'architecture religieuse dans la Méditerranée occidentale, dans l'histoire des traditions catholiques et dans l'histoire des traditions musulmanes, avec évidemment des transformations internes fonctionnelles qui ont permis la survie des architectures. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Mathieu. Aucun problème. Did you forget something? Thank you to our both speakers for this session. You have questions? In English and French, as you like.
Oui. Merci beaucoup pour cette intervention érudite et inspirante aussi. Mais je vais poser ma question en anglais, si vous permettez, because I'm just more fluent and able to express myself in English. Sorry. I think this was a wonderful overview and of material that maybe also some others did not know. I knew only very few examples, and I was wondering whether there are voices from the Muslim or the non-Christian inhabitants of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunis that reacted to those buildings. Do you know anything about this? I think that would be highly interesting.
Thank you very much for your question. I think there are Muslim voices in the moment that the buildings are converted. The official voices from the Mufti of Algiers is that we make the gift of the mosque to the Christians, so that to avoid humiliation of defeat. And also there are no written voices, but we know that thousands of Muslims defended the mosque with the arms in the hands. And maybe it's to avoid a slaughter that the Muslim authorities avoid that. And also you have to replace it in a tradition of gift and counter-gifts between sultans and European authorities. The precedent was the Church of St. Anne in Jerusalem that was given to the Dominican community in the middle of the 18th century by the Sultan. So it is like a way to show that diplomatic relationship continued. But maybe I think there is an invisibility of the Muslim voices after the conversion, because the traditional authorities in Algeria collaborate with French government in exchange of privileges, and the resistance against the French was socialist, like FLN, and they do not want it to the traditional authorities to turn back to the power, and also was with Bourguiba in Tunisia. So they didn't speak about that in the discussion before independence, but after independence, they really want some churches to be turned into mosques, but not only, like libraries or either towns hall or everything. But cancellation of Christianity was not the point. The point was cancellation of colonialism. So in no places in Maghreb, the churches was all and forcibly converted to another thing, they proportion to the new Christian community, few thousand of people. And in Morocco, that where the king stayed in the power, it was the most simple situation. It is also a link between Christianity and Judaism, because in Morocco and Tunisia, the Jews left the country. They remained in Morocco. So the fact to have functional churches was linked to the fact to have functional synagogues in Morocco. In Tunisia, only the Griba in Djerba still works. So it is a way to separate Morocco, the kingdom, and the other two countries' socialism, that shows that the Muslim voice is not one voice. It depends on the political view in the moment of the independence.
Oui, la question que j'ai regarde un peu les deux communications. Alors, on a très bien vu qu'il n'est pas tellement difficile de faire une conversion, de, disons, transformer une mosquée dans une église. C'est une opération architecturale assez simple. C'est un peu comme le dit déjà Alberti dans son traité. Hein. On prend une basilique romaine, là où il y avait le tribunal, c'est le lieu d'un pouvoir suprême, ça devient l'hôtel majeur, et puis comme ça, un espace peut fonctionner. Mais en même temps, un espace religieux consiste aussi dans les images. Hein, il y a une décoration, il y a une sculpture, il y a un dialogue entre décoration, peinture et sculpture qui est très très fort dans la religion catholique. Il y a des symboles, il y a des mots, il y a des figures, il y a des histoires, donc ce qui est foncièrement différent par rapport à ce qui se passe dans les espaces culturels de l'islam. Alors, comment on procède à ce niveau-là? Est-ce qu'on sait qu'il y a une partie de la décoration qui a été enlevée, qui avait été remplacée, ou est-ce qu'on a fait ça aussi par une espèce de bricolage, et disons de rapprocher un tout petit peu au nouveau culte sans avoir des interventions? Je parle maintenant des interventions, disons vraiment conversion un peu low cost, pas les autres exemples que tu as montrés. Mais comment ça? On a quelques témoignages, quelques précisions dessus. Et là, c'est la même question que je me suis posée pour la communication de Louis. Hein. C'est également très convaincant quand on voit le plan de Cordoue, etc. C'était pas si compliqué que ça de mettre dedans un chœur, l'hôtel majeur, etc. Mais comment ça s'est passé sur le plan de la décoration intérieure? Les images, les symboles, tout ce qui concerne le niveau iconographique d'une dimension narrative.
En anglais, je vais répondre en anglais. The images were the main way to really Christianize the space, because it was not possible to Christianize the space properly from the point of view of the architectural form, the forms recognizable to the Christians were impossible to reproduce inside a mosque. So then they have to do it through the images. And they're still in the Mosque of Cordoba, the frescoes with representations, Christian representations, all over the place, in the pillars. So they did this by the image. For example, the best way, it was a church. So image was the main resource that the Christians employed to Christianize the space. And also because that's a much complicated issue, because I think I'm convinced that most Christians in the Iberian Peninsula were not alienated by the Muslim architectural forms. They were part of the identity. They were part of, so they didn't bother if the building that was that used to be a mosque, no? Because there were forms that were in the imaginary from centuries. So.
And in the opposite side, the Christian in Maghreb kept the Quranic inscriptions in the cathedrals in Quechua, not after reconstruction, but they kept every memorial inscription of sultans that gave money to build the mosque. And also they saved an inscription that remained Maria, and they placed a statue of Virgin just beside it, because the Quranic inscriptions seemed like an acceptable relationship to God, if not accepted like a sacred book, but it was a way. And you see, when the Mufti said, it is the same God, the Christian response, it is the same, there are the same words, but it lasts only the time before reconstruction. After, there is a disruption.
Alors merci pour cet exposé qui était extrêmement dense. Il y a plein de questions. Moi, je voudrais revenir sur la critique du projet hispano-mauresque et les arguments esthétiques et certainement aussi idéologiques. Enfin, voilà, c'est un exemple absolument fascinant. Et une deuxième petite question, à la fin, tu as ouvert vers les liens avec la métropole. Qu'en est-il de cette référence mauresque, par exemple chez Bossan, à Fourvière, ou des choses comme ça? Et bien sûr, tu peux répondre en anglais. Moi, je me suis exprimée.
Oui. The first point is about the project of Aimé, the Cathedral of Oran. And the arguments in the small text concerned are aesthetic and structural. This cupola will fail because it will crush down. It is too heavy for the pillars. And also, it is not a good way to show the genius of Islamic architecture. It is a fantasy. It is it is fancy, it's not beautiful. It is just original, it's not canonic in any way. And that was the point. And the architect was very unpleased of this reaction. He writes down a letter, no way, I will justify you, and we have no justification, no archive. And in the metropolitan France, we have some architects that think about what is Orient in religious architecture. The Byzantine Orient is the one that is the most frequent. But also, there are few architecture. There is, for example, La Chapelle Algérienne in the Cap Ferret. That is a private chapel with a Moresque villa, so the chapel is like the villa. Now it remains alone because the villa was demolished. But it is only a fantasy of an owner of the villa. And there is Bossan. Bossan is an architect from Lyon that built 4 or 5 churches in Lyon, and the Fourvière Basilica. The Fourvière Basilica is just full of references, Byzantine, Romanesque, and also Moresque in the way of approaching the question of the arch and the rapport between the column and the capitals, with very straight columns and very tiny columns and very large capitals, for example. And we know that Bossan studied the examples of Islamic architecture. And what is very important at that point is that, which show Isabelle, at the beginning of the 20th century in France, there is a reflection about the common speaking of religious architecture in churches, mosques, and in Paris, for example, while they built the Paris Mosque in the beginning of the 20th generation of the decade of the 20th century. Also at that time, some Orientalism churches are built in Paris. So Bosson is not so as isolated as we think. It was a possibility. And maybe I think that because the Moresque origin of Gothic was maybe in not conscious way always living between the colonial architecture. But I don't know about that. Maybe Philippe Duffieux can answer for Bosson in the best way. It is an open question, yes, I know. That's why I prefer to work in the 18th century architecture, not in the 19th.
Merci pour votre communication très passionnante. Concernant, vous avez parlé sur la réutilisation des monuments religieux. On peut citer, vous avez parlé aussi sur les synagogues. Donc, on peut dire qu'il y a quelques exemples en Tunisie. On peut parler de la réutilisation des synagogues après l'indépendance de la Tunisie. Par exemple, la synagogue de Kairouan, elle est devenue une école coranique. Et aussi la synagogue du Bizerte qui est devenue actuellement une bibliothèque publique. Oui, et même il y a les inscriptions en hébreu en haut. Oui, merci.
You have a... You want to... Yeah?
You see with these examples that in socialist Arabic countries, oui, c'est très différent du cas égyptien où les synagogues, même sans fidèles, peuvent rester des synagogues, comme au Caire par exemple, où la synagogue est une synagogue. Donc ça dépend vraiment des cas. Et pourtant, l'Égypte était aussi, à ce moment-là, un État socialiste. Donc ça dépend vraiment des contextes, des choix. Mais la grosse différence, je pense, entre l'Égypte et le Maghreb, c'est la présence d'un christianisme autochtone, ici, avec l'Église copte, qui a changé quand même la manière de penser l'altérité et de penser les choses.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can benefit of a longer lunch break, but also to get ready to our conference trip for our speakers. Please be ready. We will go a bit earlier, so can you please gather at 2:15 at the entrance, so we can the bus to the Citadel. And you will be guided by Dr. Radwa Zaki, who will explain for you the two selected monuments of the Citadel due to the tight schedule of the day. So thank you all, and please gather outside for the lunch.